Just listen. You can hear the critical role birds play in the harmony of
I'm doing all right, Jerome. Got really sick last night, but I'm doing okay. How are you?
Welcome to Intuitive Astrology with Molly McCord. Thank you so much for joining me today as we're going to discuss the astrological energies of January 31st until February 7th as we move into the unpredictable energies of February that also include opening up the year of the dragon energies. And basically, anything goes in February. Anything can happen as it's a month of big activations, powerful surprises, breakthroughs, higher understandings of what is calling to you, what you want, what that dream
Thank you,
is.
Jay Honey.
And
How are you doing,
also
love?
perhaps some very powerful manifestations
Um,
of what to do.
I definitely
So
got
we're
way
going to
sicker last
discuss the
night,
energies here of
but
this
I'm like
next
feeling
week,
better
as
from
we
that.
always do. And in this
But not
podcast,
100%.
I approach the world, language, and energy of astrology through an
I'm feeling
intuitive
pretty
lens,
sick. Glad you're
where
doing
we
good,
go
Jay.
through the energetics, the spiritual components, and how you can be in your power, in your choices, in your light, as we all collectively navigate this cosmic energy together. Now, over this next week, we will not only have some really good astrology, but we also have some incoming solar flares to be aware of. And these solar flares are expected to hit the Earth around February 5th. And it's from that southern coronal hole that opened up on the sun. If you'll recall, a few months ago, there was a big opening in the sun of a new coronal hole. And now we're going to be receiving more streams of solar wind moving through that hole and coming towards our atmosphere. So there is energy that we're working with that is very new and different, that also correlates to how the sun is transforming. The sun is activated, and this syncs up with the astrology, as we just saw the sun and Pluto make their conjunction, their annual conjunction at 29 degrees 59 minutes of Capricorn before both entered
I
Aquarius.
appreciate you, Neo. I'm doing all the things though to take care of myself.
The sun is evolving and changing into new expressions of itself. This affects the neutrinos we receive, the light codes we receive, the energy we receive from the sun's power and life force. So keep in mind that that's part of this new playing field, is that now we are also adapting and integrating with how the sun is evolving. Another item worth noting that is playing out that directly relates to the astrology of our times is that the solar eclipses that are crossing over the US and North America are playing out right now at this time. And specifically, the issues are amplified in Texas, where there is currently a big battle between the state and federal governments over the border, and there is an ongoing standoff in Eagle Pass, Texas, which is part of the upcoming solar eclipse path that will occur on April 8th, 2024. And in a video I've done for you on YouTube, I show you how these three eclipses starting in 2017 until 2024 are drastically changing the US. And of course, it always helps for us to see how the energies are showing up and playing out. So please check out that video I have for you on the solar eclipses on YouTube. The title is Solar Eclipse Triple Whammy: How the USA is Changing Drastically with These Energies, for those of you who are interested in current events and how the astrology is playing out with them. So we're coming off of some big energies over the past week, where we had a very igniting Leo full moon followed by Uranus stationing direct. And it could feel like your energies have been all over the place, almost like you've been going back and forth or wrestling with something. It could feel like you're in these polar oppositional fields where your energy goes into the depths of one extreme or one energy and then goes into the opposing energy and is all over the place, very unsettled, very erratic. And it could feel too like there is this new electrical current running through you, not allowing anything to be calm or stable or settled, not allowing anything to be known or even clear at times. And I'm seeing this as a very big rocking back and forth that is stirring up a lot of emotions. And it could be this sense of you love something and then you hate it. You have to have it, you never want it. It's almost like the inconsistency is pushing and pulling. And it could feel too like, what do you do with this? What's this about? What's the bigger picture? And how I'm seeing the energy is that it's moving through us to help us shake off the parts of ourselves that have been held captive or held small or held back. And it's almost like trying to wrestle yourself out of a straitjacket, or what you didn't even realize you were stuck in. And I feel this very energetically. I feel this actually very much around our own self-imposed limitations that maybe were unconscious, maybe things that we thought we had to do. We thought we had to stay the course. We thought we had to be more traditional in a sense. But now with these big energies moving through Aquarius season, where we have the sun and Pluto in Aquarius, it's waking up parts of our dormant life force that I see are directly connected to repressed soul codes. And I'm seeing them as codes, like different types of coding that appears very beautifully to be sacred geometry, but also like it's just a mess. It's just a mess of stuff, a mess of energies or feelings, extremes, emotions, a mess of possibilities, ideas, potentials. And I'm seeing this energy coming up and out to shake something free. And it's interesting because I'm also being brought
The
to
past like 4 days
the
or so.
focal point or the middle balance point of the energy. So, if, for example, you've been hemming and hawing back and forth around your job, around the work you're doing, and you're realizing, oh, I don't love this. I don't know if I can keep doing it. Oh, but it's my paycheck. Oh, but there's things I do enjoy about it. And let's say you're going back and forth, maybe hour to hour, day to day. There's something here, the core message in the center, the core message that is actually gaining power.
Yeah, I took some NyQuil last night. That's why I passed the fuck out.
It's less about the job. It's more about how do you want to share.
Hello, Dr.
energy?
User.
What
How
do
you doing,
want
love?
to feel? What do you want to experience on a regular basis? And that energy is coming up and out for you to notice. That might be the discontent. That might be where you feel like you're in this straitjacket and you're looking for the key. And the key is inside because it's coming from a new internal message around a part of your life experience that you haven't tapped into before. And I feel this rising up. And because it's so destabilizing and uncertain, it's actually working with the fears first. So think of it as different layers of energy. And so it's bringing up the fears first. It's bringing up, the huge doubts, the big what ifs, the fact that, oh no, this won't work, and all the reasons it won't work, right? All the reasons it'll fail. Then you come back to center. And as you come back to center, you're returning to connect with that understanding of what you want to experience, what you want next. It's like, no, I'm feeling this way because I want to be
Nice. Yeah, my head was hurting too. I'm pretty sick, doctor, but other than that, I'm okay. I'm glad you're doing well.
Every day in the workplace, I want to focus on different things.
I've had a good day so far. I slept most of the day, Jax. How are you doing?
Exhilarated possibilities, the best case scenarios, what could transpire, how it could show up, and then you come back to center again, and maybe this dynamic continues.
My throat does hurt, so I'm not going to be using the mic the whole time, but I will use it sometimes.
Around a new part of yourself you haven't met before. And this is not like the soft, easy, flowing, gentle energy. No, this is like feeling like you just put your finger in a electrical socket, or you've been hit by lightning, or something is coming through and it's so undeniable or so powerful, and it just has you like jittering and shaking. And keep in mind, this works with people at different extremes. And so if you're not feeling it, you could be sensing it in the people around you. There can also be a lot of anger that comes up, a lot of frustration, a lot of agitation. Like there feels to be some very clear, unpleasant energies we're moving through that could be taking you to these polar opposite extremes, to the point where you don't know what to believe and you don't know what to trust. And what I'm seeing is this energy is coming back to center, and it's actually going higher. And I see it going higher into these new downloads we're receiving about new life potentials, about new directions, new parts of yourself that are coming online and are being activated. And there's something here that wants you to clear out limitations from previous timelines. This is part of a drastic timeline shift that, again, destabilizing, unclear, not even calm in the least. And then there's something here that we're adapting to. We have to adapt quickly, even though it could feel like you want to overthink it. And that can be a safety mechanism. Overthinking, overprocessing can be a way of looking for the danger, looking for what might go wrong, looking for the failure, looking for all the possible ways it could not work. And that stems from the fear body. But when I say going higher, I'm seeing that this energy is streaming in to the third eye chakra, and it's actually busting out. I'm seeing it as these very dark caverns in the brain where we have a lot of repressed memories and fears and things we haven't come into contact with. And it looks like that's what's coming up and out. So we could call it shadow work, dark night of the soul, very deep internal work. I mean, it looks like very dark matter is how I'm seeing this intuitively. Obviously, I'm not a neuroscientist, and this is not science. This is the energies I'm seeing as they're presenting themselves. And that's what's going on. It's sort of like sticking your whole hand in a powerful electrical outlet, and the energy goes right to that dense, heavy, dark energy in the brain to cleanse it out, to blast it out. And I'm laughing because it looks like a cartoon, but it doesn't feel good and it doesn't feel funny at all. And so there's something working with us at very deep layers of our being. You could feel like it's hard to calm down. You could feel like it's hard to rest. It's hard to sleep, that your nervous system won't shut down or turn off. And I'm seeing this as these electrical currents pulsing through us, and they're showing me the energy in the bloodstream. This could be very aggressive energy that comes out of nowhere. This could be something that comes up for you from a previous time in your life, and all of a sudden it's front and center again, and it stirs up your fight or flight. It's activating very primal energies too. And what I'm feeling around it is it's the universe saying, we gotta go past this. We gotta
Thank you. I just got out of the shower. It's still wet.
so that you can
Thank you. I
be
appreciate
in
it.
these higher frequencies without carrying this density or this primal energy with you. And it just feels like it's part of our expansion. It's part of our growth, and it's intense. It's intense. And I'm seeing this is part of how the ongoing February energies are going to show up. Now, on February 2nd, Mercury in Capricorn is sextiling Neptune in Pisces at 25 degrees. And this is a Mercury who has just been through the retrograde experience and now is softening with new intuitive awareness. February 2nd, something is coming into a higher understanding, and it could be something that even gives you peace, a sense of gratitude. This is
It's an astrology video that came out about 3 hours ago.
maybe you're going to want to make something with it, do something that is supportive and transcendent. This is also the energy of being able to put something aside, to not let it get to you, to not let it be something that you even take into your energy. So there's a calming influence here as Mercury finishes up the journey through Capricorn. Then Mercury enters Aquarius on February 4th or February 5th, depending on your time zone. And this is a Mercury that comes alive with something really deep, intense, and powerful. And that's because Mercury makes the first conjunction to Pluto in Aquarius. This is happening for the first time in our lives, and it's a brand new energy of self-awareness that can feel quite personal. Now, this conjunction happens at 7:58 a.m. on February 5th. That's Eastern time. So that's during the morning hours. And there could be something here where the day starts off in a new way. Now, let's put this into a bigger picture. So when we talk about Pluto and the sun moving into Aquarius,
In astrology, solar flares aren't like as scary as you'd think they'd be.
solar systems frequencies, activating more new energy fields in the galaxy. And it's very far away. In fact, we know that it's one of the furthest from Earth. It's classified as a TNO, a trans-Neptunian object. And so we can have a sense of, okay, we understand Pluto is changing signs, it's happening, we get it, we feel it. Well, when Pluto is conjunct Mercury, Mercury is your everyday. Mercury is your immediate environment. It's your communications and information. It's what's going on within you and around you that you can visibly see. So Mercury conjunct Pluto is making this Pluto transit into Aquarius more personal, more real, more in your face. And something is coming up here that is changing the way we think and communicate, also opening us up to more depths of our being and digging into our intentions, digging into what really drives us and what do we need to see in a new way. This is where Pluto could be showing you something you didn't realize you were working off of. Let's say it was deep fear, deep worry, deep doubts. Mercury conjunct Pluto, especially in Aquarius, could show you, how is that playing out for you? Is that really what you want? Is that really how you want to continue forward? And then you could catch yourself thinking something. and never questioning it, never even challenging it until this transit occurs and you're like, wow, I didn't realize I was living my whole life like this. I didn't realize I was running on fear or I was motivated by a certain thought pattern. I never saw it before, and Pluto wants you to see it. Pluto is going to open up something that's been in the shadows,
I
of your
am.
journey, in the depths of your journey, for you to understand it. But in Aquarius, there is not only a detachment, but there is an opportunity to look at the pattern. Aquarius is about how we bring all these various components together into one whole experience. It's a very complex organization. It's multiple systems, multiple parts, multiple things all working together. And Aquarius can handle it, can manage it, because Aquarius steps back to see, yes, that is either what's working or what's not working. That's what's efficient. That is serving the long term or not. So there's something really powerful here over the next week as Mercury enters Aquarius and makes that conjunction to Pluto. You could have some unexpected new visions or wild dreams. You could have something that feels
I had some crazy dreams last night.
untamed, fast, erratic. It's also quick turnarounds. Quick turnarounds of, I don't even want that anymore. I don't even care about that anymore. So keep in mind that this will be happening in the collective, and it will be a period of time when shocking announcements are made, unexpected information comes forth. Also, this relates directly to social media. This relates to the internet and website, which are all Aquarian domains. And here's something to share with you about social media. So I have an Instagram account, and it's a professional account, professional or business, whatever they call it. Last year, when Pluto was in Aquarius, I started getting this new information on my Instagram account that I had never seen before. And it was showing me people who were checking my account regularly. It was showing me usually 5 to 8 accounts that were always looking at my Instagram. And that's because these platforms
Hi, Brayden.
are not
How are you
only
doing?
run on AI now, but a lot of algorithms. And algorithms are looking for patterns and habits and the consistencies and the connections. So algorithms being very Aquarian, here was Pluto in Aquarius showing me who was all over my Instagram account. And it gave me good understanding of who to block on Instagram, block on Facebook. And also it was a very important revelation that we can think that certain things on social media are hidden or that you can't be tracked, you can't be traced. But with Pluto in Aquarius, don't think that anymore, because if you're creeping or peeping or keeping tabs on people, all of that can come out. And we don't own these platforms. These platforms can do whatever they want with their algorithms, with all the data they're collecting. Don't think that maybe you are being secretive or hidden if you're spying on somebody on social media, because all of that can change in the blink of an eye. So that feature that was showing me what was going on my Instagram page was only there during April, I believe, of 2023. So when Pluto was briefly in Aquarius. And now that feature's gone. So when I log into Instagram, I can't see that anymore. It was almost like the universe was showing me it as a reminder and as an understanding that anything can be done with data, with online experiences. Anything can change in the blink of an eye on these platforms that we don't control. We are simply visitors. We are renters. We're not the owners. So your social media use, what you use it for and how you use it, can change overnight. And just think that through, because would you be horrified if somebody knew you were visiting their profile 556 times in a 24-hour period? So just keep in mind.
No way. No way anyone does that. 500 times? No way. No way. That's insane.
But all 3 personal planets making a conjunction to Pluto in Aquarius this month. In addition to Mercury being powerful this week, we're going to have Venus in Capricorn squaring Chiron in Aries at 16 degrees. That happens also on February 5th. And this is a realignment for Venus. This is where Venus in Capricorn is going to make some choices as she squares Chiron in Aries to decide what she will take on and what she will leave behind based on how you have been working through something that has been healing, but also wounding. And I feel like this Venus in Capricorn, it's a soft square, meaning it isn't as painful or as abrupt as other squares to Chiron in Aries. It's also a closing square, which means that you've come to terms with something. You've seen it for what it is. You understand whether or not it serves you. And on the same day, the sun in Aquarius sextiles that Chiron in Aries as well. So we have energies here that are showing us a new path forward based on what you've learned, based on more of what is good for you. What is good for you right now? What is good for where you're growing and what is important to your self-empowerment? What is good for you? The sun in Aquarius sextiling that Chiron is enforcing your independence and your freedom, is showing you how to be more of yourself and to not be afraid of that. Chiron in Aries is where we're vulnerable in being our true selves. And here we have energy saying, no, I'm worth it. I can do this. I'm capable. I came in with these skills and abilities. So there could be something you're really trusting in yourself in a new way. And again, February 5th is the big day of this theme. Interesting to note that that's also the day when we are projected to be receiving those incoming solar winds from the new coronal hole in the sun. So there is a flood here of new understandings of what's possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's kind of out of it right now because sick, but thank you.
More than ever. And maybe that's part of what you've been wrestling with is the fears of being truly seen. But what really matters is seeing yourself. That's 90% of it. Just really seeing yourself, accepting yourself, really being strong, confident, and clear in these new parts of yourself, because it doesn't even matter what other people think. We think it does at first, but that's kind of how we're scapegoating it. We're saying, oh, well, it really matters what other people think. No, it doesn't. It matters what you think. Get straight with yourself. Get right with yourself, and everything else will dissolve or fall away much easier. So you get clear and strong in, this is who I am. This is my life. This is what I came here to experience and do. Nothing else really matters. And this is where you can invest your energy and time in strengthening that with your God self, with the universe, and with the mirror. Those are the two places you take it. You take it to the mirror, or you take it to God, you take it to the universe, and you work it out on your terms. You get stronger within, and that's what you need to do. That's it. Everything else is a distraction. Everything else will pull you away from your own truth, your own path, your own self-awareness, and everything else can also delay that confidence that you're seeking. It can simply be a delay. Now, yes, we need to talk things out with our trusted friends and loved ones. Yes, we need support and others to show up for us, to affirm or remind us of who we are. But I feel like this is a week where if you're wrestling with something very deep, it's because you're wrestling with who you really are and who you know you really are. And now as I see that straitjacket, it now looks like a beautiful chrysalis, a beautiful caterpillar transition into the butterfly of before that opening and that cracking open into the new self-identity. There is that internal struggle that isn't going away. And I'm also being shown that the struggle is necessary. So don't beat yourself up for the struggle. There's something about that that has value in it, that has worth in it. And there's something about this energy as well that is allowing you to move through something in its fullness, like sampling or tapping into the fullness of the energy, which is almost like leaving no rock unturned. And this is actually being presented to me as a painter's palette, where in the middle of the palette, the different colors can be blended and diluted or strengthened. But on the outside of the palette, you have your separations. You have your red, yellow, green, blue, purple, black, white. And then it's like tapping into each of those colors, brings about something even more, something that needs to be experienced in order to create it. So I hope this is making sense, because I know I'm using a lot of imagery, and that's because in a way it does feel complicated, but I trust if this resonates with you, it's landing and you're feeling it, and it's maybe even validating you. If it's not resonating, then of course don't force it, don't make it resonate. But it's being able to move through the complexities, being able to tap in to all these different energy fields is part of the gift, is part of the way through, and also what is returning you to center. Because I keep seeing the energy coming back to center, a center knowingness, a knowingness that you have that maybe has been limited, repressed, held back. There are powerful activations of this deep knowingness, and that's also what is coming online at this time. This deep knowingness is a direct transmission from your soul level intelligence, and it's coming through to get your attention around something that you are ready to create, whether that is a new idea, a new lifestyle, a new dream, or even a shift internally, something that you're complete with that perhaps no one even knows about, and that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're realizing something that is pivotal and key for yourself at this time, but it only could have come up with the force of these new incoming energies that are requiring us to move into these new energetic paradigms. I'm also seeing that a big part of this energy is a timeline crash. We are crashing into new timelines instead of gently, softly, swiftly moving into something with unicorn grace. Rather, this is like a crash landing into a very jarring new energy field that we're ready for. And it's going to keep pulsing, it's going to keep picking up the pace, which can also feel like a frantic energy. But remember that you're traveling with what you need. And what we need next will rise up to meet us on the road ahead. It feels like what we're entering here are energies that our future self has been holding for us, reserving, allowing us to arrive at this point. And now we're here, and the energies are very alive and moving quickly. And there's a part of you that knows you can handle it. And so I feel too like part of this timeline crash, part of this deep knowingness at a soul level is emerging between the future self that maybe you thought was really far away, and all of a sudden it's right here, or it's already being integrated and you're being recalibrated in a way that is just hard to describe because there's so many energetics going on. And so this can be stirring up those Chiron and Aries energies that we just discussed on February 5th, where a part of you is gaining more confidence in who you really are at this point of your journey, the newness of it. It's fresh, it's unknown. It's a sense of, I'm just figuring this out as I go, and I'm pretty sure I've got it, but there's still things that are coming up that can show you where the insecurities are, the doubts are, the parts of yourself that just take time to continue to meet, accept, and fully love. Now, on February 7th, we're also going to have lovely energy here with both Venus in Capricorn.
Thank you, Alejandro. How are you doing, love?
Uranus in Taurus at 19 degrees. And on the same day, Mars in Capricorn sextiling Neptune in Pisces at 26 degrees. Both of these energies are about going higher into the energy spectrum of masculine and feminine expressions. You could feel like a part of your feminine energy is maturing, is moving ahead, especially as Venus moves through Capricorn. Now she meets up with Uranus in Taurus at 19 degrees for the trine. And this is something that you could be sensing is just clear and true for you. And this Uranus in Taurus has been at 19 degrees before, and there could be something here.
What am I doing? I just went downstairs to get
blocking
another
your
drink.
It just
Cleaning up and
connects,
organizing right now,
flows,
as much as I
and
can
it's
while I'm sick.
energizing. It gives you a new sense of what you want, what you desire. I also feel like with the Venus in Capricorn, because this is the energy too of holding back, observing, ensuring that something is true. This could be something that you've been
200 followers on
with,
Kick. Thank you so much, guys. Welcome
witnessing
in.
and patiently working through. And now there is support from Uranus and Taurus that brings in a clear yes, even a clear no. This can be beneficial for business decisions, for financial decisions. This could be something that presents itself in the physical world, which is what the earth
Coconut water.
that gives you an excited yes, a wonderful opportunity.
Might make some tea in a minute.
Unexpected invitation or resources, support, something coming through that finally aligns.
Hey, thanks, Jane. Appreciate you.
Quite lovely, quite beautiful. And Venus in Capricorn will work hard for where she wants to go. And she takes pride in what she's earned along the way. So this is something that could have your name on it, that shows up and validates that what you've been working on is paying off. Again, that's at 19 degrees of Capricorn, 19 degrees of Taurus, and this energy will work with you more personally if you have planets or points at 19 degrees of the earth signs. That's where the energy is the strongest. Then with this Mars in Capricorn sextiling Neptune and Pisces at 26 degrees, this is the commanding Mars who wants to go forward, who wants to get things
You see the little smiley face in chat?
To ensure that something is a victory.
Like this.
It's a very strong Mars. And this energy sextiling Neptune will give him a bigger perspective on what is worth the effort, where he should take action, where he should not, and even a sense of trusting himself to navigate the current terrain. Because Mars in Capricorn can be very determined to just get it done. It is an industrious, productive Mars, but here are the whispers of his intuition, even a sense of maybe I'll hold back a little bit on this. And as he trusts that, something flows in, something opens up that he wouldn't see at first. This sextile to me looks like something approaching out of your peripheral vision, something showing up that is actually quite soft and lovely and easy, and it just has this yes to it. It has a sense of, well, that's a better direction, or that makes the work easier. So again, this is happening February 7th, when we'll also have the moon in Capricorn. And because this is occurring at the same time as Venus in Capricorn is trining Uranus in Taurus, there could be things that finally make sense. They're realistic, they're clear, and this sets us up as well for the Aquarius new moon, which will occur on Friday, February 9th at 5:59 p.m. That's Eastern Time. The Aquarius new moon is occurring at 20 degrees and 41 minutes of Aquarius, and I will have a video for you on YouTube shortly going through the energetics of that lunar chart. So as you can see, there's a lot happening as we move into February. It's a very punchy month. It is very dynamic, and there can be blasts of things coming through, grabbing your attention, hitting your awareness, feeling like it's crashing into your energy and awakening something in you that you're ready to see. And it's almost like you can't unsee it. You can't unsee it with Pluto in Aquarius. And Pluto is actually now moving into new territory as well in Aquarius, because last year Pluto moved to 0 degrees 22 minutes of Aquarius. And the minutes are really important with Pluto because the energy is so deep and intense, and because Pluto moves so slowly. Well, this week, as we enter February, Pluto moves past where he traveled in 2023. In fact, it is on February 2nd that Pluto moves to 0 degrees 23 minutes, and we continue into this initiation energy, this 0 point of new potentials that also echoes back to where Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct in Aquarius, what we call the Great Conjunction, back in December 2020. So this is a time to allow the energy to continue to open up, especially your third eye and crown chakras, to allow the energy to let in new air, new life, new possibilities, new visions, and to know that we are right on time for this level of growth, this level of awakening. And it's so much bigger than what we could even fathom at the present moment. And I know that feels overwhelming. In fact, that could be what you're moving through, is a lot of overwhelm. But there is some perfection in the chaos. And in fact, chaos is the natural state of the universe, where we have these big cataclysmic events that create ripple effects of energies, where stars burst open, where things explode out there in our galaxy, and we feel it at some level of our consciousness. Well, now that energy is what we are directly experiencing within ourselves, that we are being guided into some new openings of our own knowingness, our own soul intelligence. And that's the expansion, the chaotic expansion, the struggle of the expansion. And keep in mind, these energies are working with you most personally if you have planets or points at 0 degrees of the fixed signs. So 0 degrees of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, as well as 0 degrees of the air signs of Gemini and Libra, plus 0 degrees of the fire signs of Aries and Sagittarius. So any 0 degree points in your chart are really coming alive. They're being required to grow and evolve. And there's also something that you could feel is quite exciting about that, even if that's not the energy you feel regularly or emotionally. I did a podcast for you on Monday, January 29th, discussing the major astrological energies of February, and there is a lot of kapow energy of this month, so please listen to that. And I also am going to have for you an extra podcast episode discussing the significance of February 29th, since this is a leap year, and I've been receiving a lot of downloads and channeled information about this particular day, the energetics involved, and how it relates to the history of calendars on our planet and how calendars have been used. It's been really fascinating. So I'll be releasing those additional podcasts for you soon, as those will be channeled messages. And I have been receiving these downloads from 3 specific guides, and they've presented themselves as elders: a Mayan elder, Aztec elder, Inca elder, and they're huge. Their energy is like 9 feet tall.
What's up, Yep Boy? What's up, Vaspire? I don't have a menu right now, Yep Boy, but if there's something specific you want to see, just ask me and I can give you a price.
I'll release those podcasts.
How are you, Vaspire?
For you shortly, because it also relates to these age of Aquarius energies that we're moving into, that are quantum, that are outside the time-space continuum and are actually supporting us in more of our multidimensional abilities. And just a quick update to follow up on my announcement from last Wednesday that I am hosting a business development retreat based on your astrology chart and your human design energies. This retreat, it's called Shine Your Success Frequency, and it is with my co-presenter, Rob Thomas, who has the highest possible credentials in human design. And he and I are so excited to offer.
I'm listening to an astrology video that just came out right now. It's almost done.
Energetically designed to be successful based on your energy.
It's by Molly McCord.
So much to teach, so much to share. We're going to dig in to your charts. And this experience is almost sold out. There's only 2 spots left, and those could be gone.
Similar to Twitch, yeah.
Good news, we are going to add a second retreat later this year. We're working out those details now, because this is one of those experiences where it really helps to be in person if you can. So we are going to offer this again in the second half of 2024. I will be sharing with you those details as soon as they are finalized. And we are also
He
going
hits his
to
mark
be
center stage and is crushed by a baby grand piano.
You're replacing me?
Customize. Welcome to the Huberman Lab podcast, where we discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. Today we are discussing working memory. Working memory is a special category of memory in which we are able to hold small amounts of information in our mind for short periods of time. Working memory is also very closely related to attention. So for any of you that are interested in how to develop better focus and attention, understanding what working memory is and some of the things that you can do to improve your working memory can be very beneficial. Today I'm going to talk about what working memory is, including some of the underlying biology, although I promise, irrespective of whether or not you know any biology or you are an expert in biology, I'll make the conversation accessible to you. In addition, I will talk about tools to improve working memory, and I'll also compare working memory to other forms of memory like long-term memory and short-term memory. And through that understanding, I'm confident that you'll be able to develop better focus as well as be able to commit certain forms of information to your short and long-term memory stores. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is, however, part of my desire and effort to bring zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's podcast. Our first sponsor is Matina. Matina makes loose leaf and ready-to-drink yerba mate. I often discuss yerba mate's benefits, such as regulating blood sugar, its high antioxidant content, the ways that it can improve digestion.
Y'all, I'm so sick. Oh my God.
Possible neuroprotective effects. I also drink yerba mate because I love the taste. While there are a lot of different choices of yerba mate drinks out there, I love Matina because, again, they have the no sugar variety, as well as the fact that both their loose leaf and their canned varieties are of the absolute best quality. So much so that I decided to become a partial owner in the company. Although I must say, even if they hadn't allowed me to do that, I would be drinking Matina. It is the cleanest tasting and best yerba mate you can find. I love the taste of brewed loose leaf Matina yerba mate, and I particularly love the taste of Matina's new canned cold brew zero sugar yerba mate, which I personally helped them develop. If you'd like to try Matina, go to drinkmatina.com/Huberman. Right now, Matina is offering a free 1 pound bag of loose leaf yerba mate tea and free shipping with the purchase of 2 cases of their cold brew yerba mate. Again, that's drinkmatina.com/Huberman to get the free bag of yerba mate loose leaf tea and free shipping. Today's episode is also brought to us by BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers professional therapy with a licensed therapist carried out online. Now, I've been going to therapy for well over 30 years. Initially, I didn't have a choice. Okay, let's talk about working memory. And let's start off this discussion by comparing
What's up,
working
Anth?
memory
How are you
to
doing,
other
love?
forms of memory that most people are more familiar with, or at least when most people hear the word memory, they typically are thinking about long-term memory, like one's ability to remember the capitals of states or countries, the different continents, directions from one location to another, even one's name. All of those things are examples of long-term memory. Now, I want to emphasize that long-term memory really has 2 components. There are what we call declarative long-term memories. So these are the things that we can declare, things like facts about ourselves or the world or others. And then there are procedural long-term memories. Procedural long-term memories, as the name suggests, are aspects of our memory that allow us to perform certain procedures. They are literally action steps that we take to, for instance, ride a bicycle or drive a car, which, by the way, we might not be conscious of ourselves doing after we learn. That is, after we pass information into our procedural long-term memory. But even once those things become reflexive, they are stored in our long-term memory. Now, a discussion of long-term memory is not the focus today, but me being a neuroscientist, and I like to think you all generally being interested in the underlying biology, I'll just mention that there's a key structure within the brain that is part of a larger neural network that is a collection of structures which is absolutely essential for the formation and storage of long-term memories. And that's the hippocampus, which in Latin means seahorse. And it does look a little bit like a seahorse, but we actually have one on each side of your brain, so we say hippocampi, plural. And so what we know is that if people have damage to their hippocampus of any kind, that people have trouble accessing or forming long-term memory, sometimes both. And there's a lot more that we could say about long-term memory. Indeed, I did an entire episode of the Huberman Lab podcast about the formation and storage of long-term memories, including some tools to improve long-term memory. We'll touch on a few of those tools later today, but you can access that episode if you go to hubermanlab.com and just put memory into the search function and you'll find it there. In the meantime, if we want to understand working memory, we not only have to understand how it's different from long-term memory, but also how it's different from short-term memories. Short-term memory is a capacity that we all have that, as the name suggests, represents a short-term memory bank for information that may or may not get passed into long-term memory. So for instance, if you've learned anything.
Yes, I'm very sick, as you can see.
You learned English language, if you can write, you learn how to write, etc. Well, in order to learn those things and to commit them to long-term memory, the information required to do those things and to have that knowledge needed to be held in short-term memory. And short-term memories are the sorts of memories that we maintain for somewhere between a few minutes and potentially a few hours, maybe a little bit longer. But only a certain percentage of that is passed into our long-term memory. So for instance, if you listen to this podcast,
Thank you, Vesper.
Course lecture, whether or not that lecture is about cognitive material or whether or not it's about learning a new physical skill, regardless of what you learn, you're only going to learn a certain amount of that information. But were we to examine how much of the information you just heard or that you're hearing now you remember immediately after this podcast episode, as compared to, say, a week later, we know, based on, probably millions of scientific papers and studies, that you are going to have more information in your short-term memory stores shortly after being exposed to new information than you will later. In other words, only a small percentage of what we perceive, what we see, what we hear, etc., gets passed into short-term memory, and then only a fraction of that gets passed into long-term memory. Now, the neural circuits for short-term memory and the passage of short-term memories into long-term memory involve a lot of different brain structures, but here again, we can implicate the hippocampus because the actual passage of short-term memories into long-term memories occurs in part within the hippocampus, and then a lot of people don't know this, some of the memories that we think of as long-term memories are actually distributed into the neocortex, which is the outer portion of the brain. Now, the point here is less to fill your mind with different names of things and nomenclature, but rather to get you thinking about what's involved in creating short and long-term memories, and equally important, that even though the hippocampus is critically involved in the formation of short and long-term memories, that the formation of short and long-term memories is really a network phenomenon. In fact, among the more important themes that comes up again and again on this podcast, anytime that we're talking about neuroscience, or actually biology in any case, is that rarely, if ever, is there one location in the brain where something happens. Typically, it's a network phenomenon, meaning it's the collaboration of a bunch of different brain areas passing information from one location to the next and storing it in a kind of distributed way. Now, another key thing to understand about working memory and how it is different from short and long-term memory is that the formation of short and long-term memories almost always involves neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the nervous system's ability to change in response to experience. Now, there are different types of neuroplasticity. So often when we hear about neuroplasticity in the popular sphere, people don't emphasize that there are different types of neuroplasticity, and it's worth paying a little bit of attention to what those different types are. There is, for instance, what we call long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation, or LTP, as the acronym goes, is the strengthening of connections between neurons as a consequence of their repeated firing very closely together in time. Okay, there's a lot more to it, but if you've ever heard the phrase fire together, wire together, sometimes that is misattributed to Donald Hebb, who did talk about neuroplasticity. By the way, Donald Hebb was a psychologist up in Canada who talked about neuroplasticity in the context of lots of different forms of learning. But that fire together, wire together phrase was not actually stated by Donald Hebb. It was stated by Carla Schatz, my colleague at Stanford. And she was referring to LTP, but other forms of neuroplasticity that occur mainly in development when neurons fire very closely in time and thereby strengthen those connections, which can include LTP, okay? So for now, think of LTP as any time that some small group of neurons, could be 2 neurons, could be 2,000 neurons, are very active closely together in time, and they have access to one another physically, and the consequence is often, not always, but is often LTP. That is the strengthening of those connections such that after that barrage of activity subsides, those neurons can speak to each other. They can communicate through electrical activity and chemical activity much more easily. Their communication is more robust. It's like removing a wall between a conversation such that the conversation can take place more fluidly. Now, there are other forms of neuroplasticity, including LTD, long-term depression, which unfortunately the name often calls to mind ideas about depression as a psychiatric
Thank you, Jay.
or a
I
psychological
appreciate that.
symptom, but it has nothing to do with that. Long-term depression is simply the inverse of LTP. It's actually the weakening or the removal of connections that we call synapses between neurons. I want to emphasize that both LTP and LTD are both critically involved in lots of different kinds of learning, and both of them tend to be involved in the formation of both short-term memories and long-term memories. And this
Thank
is
you,
very
Anne.
important in the removal of short-term memories and long-term memories, literally forgetting of certain things, because as we all know, there are many things that we will never forget, and there are also things that we almost always forget. Now, there's a third form of neuroplasticity that's involved in the formation of short and long-term memories that's important for us to discuss just briefly. But I do want to emphasize that there are not just 3 forms of neuroplasticity. There are many other forms, dozens, if not more, things like spike timing dependent plasticity, paired pulse facilitation, and on and on. But the third type of neuroplasticity that I'd like to mention now is neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the formation of new neurons. Now, neurogenesis is robust in the developing nervous system. We know this. It's robust in the developing nervous system of animals and humans. However, neurogenesis, the literal formation of new neurons in the brain, is a very exciting idea, and it does occur. And it's very exciting in a way that has motivated lots of popular press outlets to talk about or to discuss papers that have discovered neurogenesis in the adult brain. Because let's be honest, what's more exciting than the idea that your brain can add new brain cells later in life? And indeed, that has been shown even
Hi,
in
Kellogg. How are you, love?
the 80s and 90s. However, it's very important to
What's
know
up?
that the total amount of neurogenesis that occurs in the adult human brain is infinitesimally small as a mechanism for neuroplasticity and learning as compared to the other forms of neuroplasticity that we discuss, such as
How long am I gonna stream for? I slept all day, so we'll see. We'll see how I feel.
Throw cold water on the topic of neurogenesis. It's an incredibly interesting and important topic, but all too often they tend to eclipse the much more common mechanism for the formation of short and long-term memories, which are those other forms we just talked about, LTP, LTD, etc. So the point here is that, yes, indeed, there are new neurons that can be added in the adult brain, maybe even in the adult human brain. And there is some evidence that some of those new neurons are added to the hippocampus. In fact, a particular region of the hippocampus called the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. And there's been a lot of controversy about how much neurogenesis occurs or doesn't occur, and whether or not it occurs after puberty or not. There's a whole field of people battling over this now for several decades. But one thing is very
I can never get all the coconut water out of these.
while
It's like shaped
exciting
weird.
and intriguing, is not the main mechanism by which the formation of short and long-term memories occurs.
Do you like cats?
When you learn new information, as you are right now, the storage of that information in your short-term memory networks, which is then passed on to your long-term memory networks and that can be recalled, that allows you to state certain facts about, for instance, the existence of this thing called a hippocampus. Hopefully you will remember that going forward. Or your ability to perform any kind of motor movement that you learned now or way back in childhood. Most of that is the consequence of the strengthening of particular connections.
Aw, yeah, if you're in my Discord, post pictures. That's adorable.
Those are the 2 major forms of neuroplasticity.
Can I show you something that kind of messed me up? This is a ribbon that represents 100 years. And depending on how old you are when you're watching this, you've probably...
Okay, so I don't want you to get the impression that there's something wrong with my memory and that I forgot that this episode is not about short or long-term memory, but it's about working memory. And indeed, I have not forgotten. So now is where I tell you why I've been talking about short and long-term memory and the mechanisms of those. Because I want them to provide a stark contrast for what we call working memory. Working memory, as far as we know, does not involve neuroplasticity, or at least if it does, it's not a particularly robust aspect of working memory. Rather, working memory is the reflection of a particular neural circuit running an algorithm over and over and over for different types of information, but the information isn't stored, it is actually intentionally discarded. Now, what sorts of daily activities?
You could do DMs, or if you search the Discord, there should be an animal channel.
The answer to that is basically everything that you need to do, but that you don't want to remember. Now, what types of things would those be? Well, let's think about it. Most all of us learned at some point in our life to tie our own shoes. Presumably, you know how to tie your own shoes. If you don't, perhaps you should learn, or wear Velcro or slippers. I don't know, but assuming you can tie your own shoes, that's something that you know how to do, and you can do it as a procedural long-term memory. You can do that action. You don't have to think about it too much. Working memory would come into play when, say, you wake up in the morning and you know that you need to head out for a jog, but you also need to make a cup of coffee first, and you need to remember where the coffee is, where your shoes are, and perhaps you're making a phone call or you're having a conversation while you need to tie your shoes, and so on and so forth. Working memory is basically the taking in of information that's critical for you to sequence your actions over a short period of time and then forget that sequence. For instance, I'm willing to bet that you put your shoes on to go running before you go running. That's sort of a duh. And if you're like me, you drink your water, your coffee, your yerba mate before you go running. The point here is that if you wake up in the morning and you like caffeine before you go for a run, there are a certain series of action steps that you need to carry out to hydrate, make that cup of coffee or tea, drink it, put on your shoes, head out the door. You need to sequence things properly, but you don't want to commit your long-term or even your short-term memory stores to carrying out that sequence. You simply want to be able to carry out that sequence and then discard that information about the sequence and focus your attention on, for instance, what trajectory you're going to run through the park or around your neighborhood. Then you want to discard that information and you want to lean into the next portion of your day, and so on and so on. In fact, working memory is involved in essentially every activity, both cognitive and motor, from the point you wake up in the morning until the time you go to sleep at night, for every single day of your life. And we know this because there are indeed people who have diminished working memory or even lack working memory entirely, although the latter is somewhat rare. It has happened. And as you can imagine, they have a complete failure of ability to sequence activities, and their lives are extremely difficult. They need a ton of assistance from other people, even more assistance than do people who have minimal or no long-term memory. Okay, so this is really highlighting just how important working memory is. Working memory is basically the way that you navigate any immediate environment. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very closely tied to attention, because in order to know what to do now, and then what to do subsequently, and then subsequent to that, you need to be able to hold your attention to the things you need to do. So working memory and attention collaborate literally at a neural circuit level and at a neurochemical level in order to allow you to move through your day in an adaptive, functional way. And people who have challenges with attention or focus or working memory, and sometimes it can be hard to dissociate which one they're having challenges with, really have a hard time moving through life as compared to people whose attention and working memory is more robust. Now, the good news is today we're going to talk about working memory, some of the neural circuits involved, and some of the neurochemicals involved that can augment or improve working memory. And we're also going to talk about what one can do to
Do I drink coffee? I do drink coffee sometimes, mostly tea though.
Chemicals within the circuits that control working memory. In other
Later,
words,
Jay. Take care.
working memory. Now, I can talk about working memory and the mechanisms, etc., all
Hi,
day
Valley.
long. But as is often the case, sometimes it's better to not just learn about concepts, but actually to experience them in real time. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to give you a working memory test. This is the sort of working memory test that you would take if you were to go into a psychology laboratory or a neuroscience laboratory and they were studying working memory in humans. Now, there's another advantage to us doing this in real time, right here as you're listening, or as you're listening and watching. And that's because you're going to get data. You're going to get information about what your baseline working memory capacity is. And you're going to want to keep those data in your short-term
How you doing, Valley?
maybe even your
How's your
long-term
day?
memory stores, but certainly your short-term memory stores, because shortly later in this episode, I'm going to talk about different ways to improve your working memory depending on where your baseline working memory starts, which, by the way, turns out to be a pretty good proxy for the levels of a neuromodulator called dopamine within the neural circuits that control working memory. So right now, let's take a working memory task. We're going to do this purely through audio form because I realize some people are watching and listening to this on YouTube and others are just listening to this episode. So there are not going to be any visual cues or slides that I present. And that's perhaps what distinguishes what we're about to do most from what would happen in a laboratory. Typically in a laboratory, there would be some visual presentation of what I'm about to say. But here, because of the format that most of you are consuming this information by, we're going to do this purely by audio. So the first test of your working memory is very simple. I'm going to read off a series of letters. And your task is to remember.
Yeah, it can definitely give some people anxiety. It gives me anxiety if I have too much of it.
The first string of letters is J, K, Z, P, I. Okay, just to make this really easy, I'm going to say it twice. Although typically in a working memory task, it would just be said once. But I'm going to make this extra easy. J, K, Z, P, I. Okay? Now, you in your own head can try and recite back those letters if you like. Okay, second string of letters. R, O, M, K, L, E. I'm going to make this extra simple and do it again. Not typical for a working memory task, but there are some working memory tasks where that happens.
Oof. Traffic because the weekend festivities? Aw, yay. Sorry, traffic was dog shit. That's one thing I'm excited for the place I'm going is like the most traffic there is like one stoplight. Aw, damn, that sucks. His name is Resin. Damn, I wish I could make it so VIPs don't have to watch them. Kick doesn't have ads. YouTube, I don't know how often there's ads on YouTube. I don't know how that works. Fansly also does not have ads. But watching the ads do help the stream, so thank you, I appreciate it. I have more watch hours on this YouTube account, so I'm trying to get them both monetized hopefully this year. We'll see. For some reason, I'm craving pancakes. Pancakes sound good right now. Waffles are better. I just don't know if I know where a waffle maker is. I could look for it though. Waffles are better. Hey Bruss, welcome in. Trying to find my phone, but there's a cat in the way. Oh, the cat is on the phone.
It happened. We got the house! You did! 2,000 miles away.
We do long.
R-O-M-K-L-E. Okay. Now a third string of letters. This one's going to be a little bit longer. So cue up that working memory and attention. W-A-C-Q-V-D-N. I'll repeat that again. W-A-C-Q-V-D-N. How many of the letters I just read can you remember it? Okay, so depending on how many letters you can remember, perhaps you have a low, moderate, or high degree of working memory. Keep in mind that some of you are perhaps doing other things, you're attending to driving or other tasks within your home or your office, and so perhaps you weren't able to pay full attention, so there'll be some variation there. But nonetheless, after reading each of those strings of letters, you were asked to recall those letters in your mind. And if you wrote them down and you're rereading them, yes, that's cheating. But how about this? What if I were to ask you now about the simplest first string of letters, the one that consisted of only 5 letters? How many of you can remember any of those 5 letters now? Okay. I can't hear you if you're shouting them out. I can't see you if you're raising your hand. But chances are most of you have forgotten the first series of letters, even though it was quite short and you could remember it early on. That ability to remember that string of letters when you first heard them, and indeed I read them twice, so I'd be very surprised if any of you couldn't remember that string of letters after hearing them twice. But I also read you some other letters in the interim, okay? So that now, just a couple minutes later, I'm asking you to remember that first string of 5 letters. And assuming that you didn't write it down and you're not cheating, chances are you remember anywhere from 2 to 0 of those.
Thank you so much, Russ. Thank you.
Which is a perfect
Sorry, I had a
example
really
of
bad sneeze.
your working memory. Nothing got converted to short-term.
Thank you so much.
Long-term memory. Rather, your working memory was able to work with that information, hold it in mind for just as long as you thought you needed to know that information, but then, thank goodness, that information was discarded. You didn't know that I was going to ask you for that first string of letters again after reading you the longer string of letters, but I did that deliberately to show you how your working memory works. So in some sense, the working memory task is a bit unusual in that it's a test of, yes, memory in the very, very short term, but also a test of your ability to forget, to discard information that's not critical. And that gets us back to the original definition of working memory, which is our ability to attend to specific small batches of information, remember it for just as long as we think we need to, and then to discard that information. And by the way, if you want to know what those first 5 letters were, they were J, K, Z, P, I. I'd like to take a brief moment and thank one of our sponsors, and that's AG1. AG1 is a vitamin mineral probiotic drink that also contains adaptogens. I started taking AG1 way back in 2012. The reason I started taking it and the reason I still take it every day is that it ensures that I meet all of my quotas for vitamins and minerals. And it ensures that I get enough prebiotic and probiotic to support gut health. So now's where we talk a little bit about the neural circuitry and the neurochemistry of working memory. Now, it's important that we do this because in a few minutes, you're also going to learn that people generally fall into 2 broad bins of having a high or low baseline of a certain neurochemical in the brain that affords them either high or low working memory capacity. Now, in reality, it's a distribution. In fact, it's what we call a normal distribution, so it really isn't 2 bins.
Thank you,
In
Valley.
today's discussion, and in fact in a lot of laboratory studies, you can actually
Might
dig
actually make some
deeper
waffles or
into these 2
pancakes.
groups. The neural circuitry
Sounds good.
underlying working memory involves a lot of different brain locations, that is, a lot of different neural networks collaborating to create this thing we call working memory. However, there are a couple of key hubs, that is, locations within the brain, that are especially important for working memory. The ones that I'd like to focus on today involve the prefrontal cortex. So this is neural real estate that resides just behind the forehead, and the neurons in the brainstem, so further back in the brain, that manufacture dopamine and that send their little wires that we call axons up to the prefrontal cortex to release dopamine. Dopamine is a neuromodulator. Many people are familiar with dopamine and familiar with it in the context of motivation and drive. Sometimes people mistakenly think it's only involved in pleasure, but dopamine is involved in motivation and drive. When dopamine systems go awry, that is, if their levels get too high, that can create manic states, it can create addictive states. When dopamine levels are too low, you can get movement challenges, such as in Parkinson's, which is a deficit or a literal destruction of the neurons that manufacture dopamine. There are a bunch of different areas of the brain that those dopamine neurons in the brainstem project to, but for right now, we're going to focus almost entirely on the dopamine projections from the brainstem to the prefrontal cortex, which is called the mesocortical circuitry. I'm not going to get into the origins or the meaning of the mesocortical versus other dopamine projection systems. I did that in a couple of episodes about ADHD and attention and dopamine in particular, and you can find those at hubermanlab.com. Just put dopamine and circuits into the search function and it will take you to those particular timestamps where I describe that. But since we want to keep things fairly top contour at the level of neural circuitry here, just know that there are a bunch of neurons that manufacture dopamine back in the brainstem that send their axons, those little wires, up to the prefrontal cortex, and that the amount of dopamine released per unit time, so in a certain amount of time, strongly dictates the extent to which working memory capacity is going to be high, medium, or low. Now, I want to be very clear because I'm going to come back to this a little bit later again and again. It is the case that when dopamine levels are lower, that is, either there are fewer neurons that have the potential to release dopamine in the frontal cortex, or for whatever reason, less is being released in the frontal cortex, that working memory performance tends to be lower as compared to conditions where dopamine release or the availability of dopamine is higher. However, it is not the case that more dopamine is always going to equate to improved working memory. This is so important that I'm going to say it again. It is not always the case that increasing the amount of dopamine transmission in the frontal cortex leads to improvements in working memory. There is a specific criteria that allows us to predict whether or not it will improve or maintain or actually degrade working memory performance. So before you head to the end of the podcast to try and figure out ways to increase dopamine to improve working memory, please keep that fact in mind. Don't just commit it to your working memory, commit it to your short and long-term memory, because that's very important if your goal is to improve your working memory. With that said, I do want to describe just a little bit of research showing the relationship between having a low working memory span, as it's called, the ability to only remember a few letters or numbers or short batches of information, as compared to a high working memory span, meaning longer strings of letters, longer strings of numbers, which of course in the real world translates to being able to
it's evening time
shorter
here.
versus longer action sequences, as described earlier in the scenario where you're getting up in the
Hi,
morning,
Kellogg,
you're
welcome
getting
home.
coffee and you're heading out to run, et cetera, et cetera. People do differ in terms of their working
NAC, it's a cool supplement.
And
What
there's
is
a
it?
classic
What does it
study
do?
done by Cools and Desposito.
Enjoy
and
your food,
colleagues.
Valley.
This was published in 2008,
Thank you.
where they had a way to label the amount of dopamine that is available.
Like every time I get up, I feel
in
exhausted
human
though.
subjects. They did this by the injection of a specific dye. That dye gets taken up specifically by the neurons in the brain that manufacture dopamine. Then they were able to image the brains of those people while those people were wide awake using something called positron emission tomography. Again, the specific tool isn't necessarily important, but since some of you like to know. And what they found is that for people that had a high working memory span, that is, could remember long
Wanna send me
strings
some
of
info on
numbers or
it?
letters or other information, they tended to be the people that had more dopamine available for release in the frontal cortex, either because they had more of the dopamine neurons themselves or similar number of neurons, but those neurons had more dopamine
Past
to
midnight in
release,
UK.
okay?
I see. It's
And they also found the converse.
not
Individuals
too
that
late,
had
6
a
p.m.
low
for us.
working memory span and ability had less dopamine available for release. So that establishes a correlation, but it's not causal. A different study, which is also a classic, was carried out by Brzozowski, Brown, Rosvold, and Goldman. And this is a really important study because in this study, they were able to introduce small amounts of dopamine directly into the cortex and evaluate working memory capacity. Now, anytime a working memory test is done, the same pattern always emerges. This is regardless of any dopamine being infused into the brain, which is people and animals for that matter are very good at remembering short spans of numbers, letters, or other types of information. So if you tell them one thing, like the letter A, and then you ask them, do you remember the letter? Almost everybody remembers that. But if you give them a string of 10 letters, they remember fewer.
Hello, Verit. How are you doing, love?
Sort of obvious, but it's an important point to emphasize nonetheless. And so there's a kind of a dropping off curve of performance as one progresses from fewer to greater number of items to be remembered. In this study, when dopamine was introduced to the frontal cortex,
I'm pretty sick, but other than that, I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. I'm glad you're well.
increased. It was a very straightforward result. More dopamine introduced allowed longer letter, number, and information strings to be remembered. And of course, forgotten, because that's what working memory involves. Remembering and then discarding of information shortly thereafter. Now, the findings that I just described complement what I said before, which is the naturally occurring experiment. Bring people into the lab, measure their working memory span, look at how much dopamine they make. Higher dopamine, better working memory. Lower dopamine, lower working memory. The experiment I just described was one in which dopamine is introduced, showing that dopamine is very likely the rate limiting or the capacity limiting, it's probably the better way to put it, the capacity limiting neuromodulator for improving working
Hello,
memory.
thank you for the rainbow
It's a
biddies.
nerd speak way of saying more dopamine allows for better working memory. But a critical feature of this experiment is that they did a number of experiments where they didn't introduce dopamine, but instead they introduced other neuromodulators to the prefrontal cortex, such as norepinephrine or serotonin. And the interesting finding is that the addition of norepinephrine or serotonin, which of course are other neuromodulators that can change the firing patterns of neurons in the prefrontal cortex, but elsewhere as well. It's just that in this case, they were added to the prefrontal cortex, had no effect on working memory. It neither improved nor degraded working memory when those neuromodulators were introduced. In other words, dopamine, and perhaps only dopamine, seems to be the dominant neuromodulator for regulating the degree, that is, whether or not you have small, medium, or large amounts of working memory capacity in the prefrontal cortex. And of course, there have been a bunch of other experiments that are worth mentioning briefly in this context, such as taking people that have a high working memory capacity and
Thank you, Kellogg, because I'm gay. Thank you. Thank you for the gay rainbows. I appreciate it.
Especially the dopamine projecting to the prefrontal cortex. And then they're given a drug that depletes dopamine within the prefrontal cortex, and their performance drops. And so what's so nice about the literature around working memory is that while I'm not covering all of that literature exhaustively, it all tends to jive. It all points in a direction whereby the levels of dopamine being released in the prefrontal cortex during working memory tasks correlates very strongly with capacity to perform working memory tasks. Lower dopamine, lower working memory span, as it's called. Higher dopamine, higher working memory span. Okay, so next we're going to do another working memory task, different than the one we did earlier. And we're going to do that with a specific purpose in mind, which is for you to be able to determine what your working memory capacity is, and by extension, your baseline levels of dopamine, or at least the levels of dopamine that are likely being released into your prefrontal cortex while you do these working memory tasks. In other words, we're going to try and figure out whether or not you are of the low, medium, or high working memory capacity. And
I mean, she posts on Twitter and stuff.
Establish whether or not you likely have low, medium, or high amounts of dopamine available for release in the prefrontal cortex. Of course, we're not putting you into a positron emission tomography.
She's like one of the YouTubers that I followed back in the day that was just like sick of the YouTube thing. She started doing like drama content and then she like quit kind of shortly after that.
The researchers were trying to determine what people's levels of dopamine within these particular neural networks we've been discussing, the mesocortical pathway, are likely to be. In other words, performance on the working memory task that we are about to do is a decent indication.
Yeah, during that whole era, I was like, I don't know how YouTubers like do that type of content for a living. Sounds like really exhausting.
Unnecessary alarm if, for instance, you fall into the low working memory span group. In fact, if you fall into the low working memory span group, there are actually some terrific tools that you can use to improve dopamine transmission in those pathways and improve your working memory. I also don't want people to get the impression that somehow performance on this working memory task is reflective of some larger dopamine issue in the brain, and certainly it is not. I repeat, it is not diagnostic of Parkinson's or any kind of neurodegenerative condition. Although I will say that deficits in working memory are common in patients with Parkinson's for obvious reasons. Those patients have deficits in dopamine neurons, not only production, but the number of dopamine neurons. It's one of the hallmark features of Parkinson's, but also in things like traumatic brain injury, et cetera. But the working memory task that you're about to take, when given to a general population or a group of undergraduates or so-called normals or typical control subjects, which all of you are, okay? So unless you're dealing with a traumatic brain injury or you have Parkinson's, we know that the data that you're going to get back right now.
Yeah, that was really dumb.
People get back when they do these sorts of studies.
That's why I don't do much stuff with my partner anymore, because people are fucking weird. People are just too fucking weird, dude.
And some people have a high working memory span. And today we're actually just going to divide into two bins: short working memory span and high working memory span. And we can have some degree of confidence that correlates with the amount of dopamine available for release in the frontal cortex. But, and this is a very important point, as we progress along this discussion of working memory, the neural circuits, dopamine, et cetera, I want to make clear something that I said earlier, which is that it is not the case that increasing the amount of dopamine that's available always increases working memory span. In fact, there's a common circumstance whereby people with a relatively high degree of working memory capacity increase their dopamine levels even further using pharmacology or other methods that we'll discuss, and their performance actually can degrade, okay? So if any of that is confusing now, we'll make it all very simple going forward so that if you decide to implement any of the protocols discussed in this episode, that you are aware of what you can expect and whether or not you are in the category of people that should or perhaps should not incorporate those protocols. Okay, let's test your working memory again. This time, the working memory task is going to be a little bit different than the one you did previously. This working memory task involves me reading 6 different sentences.
I don't know if you saw the new fill today, but it was really insane.
These 6 sentences, because you're going to be asked some information about these sentences in a few moments. The first sentence is real estate costs.
Yeah, and some people want to bring it back, and it's really weird.
Is the Atlantic
Thank you for the
Ocean
subscribe
is
on YouTube.
warm
Welcome in.
summer. The third
Yeah,
sentence
dude,
is,
don't say
"There's a
too many
lot of
details, but
interest
that shit was
now."
so fucked up. It was so fucked up. He was like a YouTuber, and it was
The
up on
fourth
YouTube for like
sentence
5
is,
hours, I guess.
"Some reptiles
Fucked
eat
up, man.
meat once a year."
I just watched Phil cover it. I didn't
Fifth
look into it
sentence
deeper
is,
because I was like,
"Kids
I
nowadays look at
can't mentally
screens
handle
more than
that.
60% of their waking life. And the sixth and final sentence is, football can mean different sports depending on the country. Okay, so I read you six
Not Dr.
sentences.
Phil, Philip DeFranco. He's a YouTuber.
Moderately long, I confess. Your job for the working memory task is now to recall as many of the final words of each of those sentences as you can. I'll give you a few moments to do that. Now, before I tell you what the final word of each of those sentences actually is, I want to remind everybody that working memory capacity follows a normal distribution. So some of you will be able to remember the final word of perhaps 5 or even 6 of those
Yeah,
sentences.
yikes.
Although must say
I haven't
that
been on that website in a long time.
some of you are going to be able to remember 3 to 4 of the final words of those sentences. And that's more typical. That actually represents the average, or the mean, as we call it. And then fewer people, although still many of you, will only be able to remember 1 or 2 of the final words of those sentences. Okay, so now I'm assuming that most of you have tried to call to memory the final word of as many of those 6 sentences as you can. And maybe you've written them down, or you've typed them into your phone, or you have some record of what you recall those 6 final words of those sentences are. Now I'm going to tell you the actual final word of each of those sentences. The final word of the first sentence was up, because as you may recall, the sentence was, real estate costs are going up. The final word of the second sentence was summer, because the sentence was, the Atlantic Ocean is warm in summer. The final word of the third sentence was cars, because the sentence was, there is a lot of interest in electric cars. The final word of the fourth sentence was year, because the sentence was, some reptiles eat only once a year. The final word of the fifth sentence was life, because the sentence was, kids nowadays look at screens more than 60% of their waking life. And the final word of the sixth sentence was country, because the sentence was, football can mean different sports depending on the country. Okay, so be honest with yourself and tell yourself, and you don't have to tell anyone else if you don't want to, how many of the final words of those 6 sentences you could remember correctly. It's important that you remember them correctly. Again, the number of words that you can recall, that is your working memory span, is going to vary from person to person. But we can take the normal distribution of those scores and sort of draw a line down the middle and say that if you could remember 3 to 6 of the final words of those sentences correctly, you're going to fall into the high working memory span group. Whereas if you could only remember 1 or 2 or maybe 0 of the final words of those 6 sentences, then you're going to be in the low working memory span group. Again, I don't want to alarm anybody. This doesn't mean that you have any global memory deficits or dopamine deficits, but it is important, especially if you plan to apply any of the protocols to improve working memory, that you faithfully, that is, you accurately report your working memory performance, at least to yourself. Now, as you recall, whether or not you have low or high, and here we are just binning into low and high, there's no medium. We've divided right at that line. We're saying if you can remember 3 to 6, we're calling that high working memory span, at least for this discussion. And if you can remember fewer than 3, even down to 0 of the final words of those sentences, that's low working memory span. We're dividing it in 2. We divided you into 2 groups, and we do know when this has been done in large numbers of human subjects, and in some cases all of those subjects have their brains imaged for the amount of dopamine available for release in their prefrontal cortex, that short working memory span correlates with lower amounts of dopamine, whereas higher working memory span or longer working memory span, whatever you want to call it, correlates with more dopamine available for release in the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is where things get really interesting and frankly, really exciting for everybody, especially the folks in the low working memory span group. Work from Mark Esposito and colleagues at UC Berkeley, as well as other laboratories, have explored the consequences of increasing dopamine levels in the brain of typical populations of individuals. So these are not people with Parkinson's or TBI, but undergraduate students, which we do realize is not completely representative of the quote unquote normal population outside the university, but also people from the community, so people who are not university students and so on. And the ways that they've increased dopamine in those individuals had tended to rely on pharmacology. So these are prescription drugs that most often have been developed for the treatment of Parkinson's in order to increase dopamine levels, but for some other purposes as well. Drugs like bromocriptine, which we know are so-called dopamine agonists. An agonist is a drug that has the consequence of increasing the amount of a given neurochemical, in this case, dopamine. Whereas an antagonist is a drug that either blocks or prevents or somehow lowers the total available amount of a certain chemical, such as dopamine or serotonin, etc. So bromocriptine is a drug that increases dopamine. So when human subjects came into a laboratory, didn't take any drug, no bromocriptine yet, and of course they were being evaluated for whether or not they were taking any meds for ADHD, their caffeine consumption, etc. There were certain rule-ins and rule-outs for that study, but certainly people that were taking any kind of prescription medication for ADHD were not included in the study or were eliminated from the study because those drugs can indeed increase dopamine as well as some other neuromodulators such as norepinephrine and epinephrine. I covered all that in the 2 ADHD episodes that I did, which again, you can find at hubermanlab.com. Just go to the search function, put in ADHD. In any event, in these studies, they took people that had not taken any drugs to increase dopamine, had their working memory measured, very similarly to the way that you measured your working memory a few minutes ago with the 6-sentence business that we did. And then they took bromocriptine. And they either took a low, a moderate, or high dose of bromocriptine. And 90 minutes later, they took a working memory task. And what was observed was very interesting. You can probably predict what it is based on everything I've said up until now. Individuals that initially had low baseline levels of dopamine and therefore shorter working memory span, so they only remembered 0 to about 3 of the final words of that 6-sentence series, their performance significantly improved. They were able to remember 4 and in some cases up to 6 of the final words of those sentences. Now, that is in complete agreement with everything we said up until now. It simply says that dopamine is important for working memory. If you start off with lower dopamine stores or dopamine availability for release in the prefrontal cortex, lower working memory performance, increased dopamine through ingestion of bromocriptine, which is this dopamine agonist. All of the circuit changes that we want and would expect to improve working memory occur, and indeed working memory improves. Okay? Very straightforward. That's interesting, but the even more interesting part of the study is that individuals that already had high working memory span, when they took bromocriptine at a low or a moderate dose, their working memory did not increase further. Now, if somebody was already getting 6 of the final words of those 6 sentences, well then of course they couldn't improve their performance anymore. But many of the people in the high working memory span group, of course, only remembered 4, in some cases 3, typically it would be 4, 5, or 6 of the final words of those sentences. When they took bromocriptine at low or moderate doses, their working memory did not improve significantly. There was either no change or a very modest change. And here's where things get really interesting. When individuals who already had a high working memory span took the highest dose of bromocriptine, and by the way, studies verified that the amount of dopamine available indeed increased, so that was important to do, and they did that. Well, their working memory performance actually decreased, such that now they had a short or a low working memory span. So what this tells us is that the relationship between dopamine and working memory follows an inverted U-shaped function. So imagine a U and then just flip it over, meaning if you have low dopamine availability in the prefrontal cortex, working memory span is short. As you increase that amount, working memory becomes greater, but if you increase the amount of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex too much, working memory span actually drops significantly below the baseline that you started with. Now, this is important for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the known relationship between working memory and attention. Now, this is very important to understand in the context of ADHD, but also for people who don't have ADHD and are struggling to maintain focus and attention and carry out working memory tasks throughout their normal everyday life, not in the laboratory, but just moving through life. Because these days we hear a lot about people struggling with focus and attention. Perhaps, we don't know, perhaps in part due to overuse of smartphones, social media, etc., although there's not yet a direct causal relationship that's been established. The data that are emerging suggests that indeed overuse of those things can cause problems, but regardless of the source, there does seem to be more ADHD both in kids and in adults, and subclinical challenges in focus and attention. And here's where things get really interesting as it relates to the neural circuitry. Work from Desposito and colleagues and other laboratories as well have shown, using the similar paradigm that I described before, of giving people drugs to increase their baseline levels of dopamine above their initial starting point of short or long-term memory span capacity, and then had people perform different types of working memory tasks that tap into two different aspects of attention and working memory. Up until now, we've been talking about working memory. It's kind of just one thing. But working memory actually involves two things, or at least two things. The first is that in order to carry out a working memory task and to attend to something, to really focus, we need the ability to rule out distractors. We need to be able to not pay attention to things that would otherwise distract us. In addition to that, we need to be able to switch from one context to the next, right? Making the cup of coffee to putting on one's shoes and heading out the door, and in some cases, layering different contexts together, talking on the phone while tying one's shoes, and so on and so forth. What this work shows us is that the ability to task switch and context switch, that is to shift around what it is that we're paying attention to and interleave different things that we're paying attention to, something that's so critical for moving through our daily lives, is largely dependent on the dopamine projections to a structure in the brain called the basal ganglia, which is a structure I've talked about before on this podcast, but if you didn't hear about it, we can just broadly define this structure as being involved in movement generation and stopping movement generation. In fact, it's often discussed as the neural circuitry that generates go, as in do commands, and no go, don't do commands. So the basal ganglia are involved in task switching, and they are involved in task switching in part by sending certain commands to go, do certain things, and no go, to not do other things. Okay, task switching. Stop doing this, start doing that. Start doing that, stop doing this. And sometimes to varying extents, right? I mean, we could take any real world scenario of tying one's shoes while talking on the phone, and we could microanalyze it in the context of this. But I think if you think about it just a little bit, you understand that in order to perform daily tasks, we need to be able to task switch. And that's not always a start one task, end. Start a new task, end. Oftentimes we're interleaving different tasks to varying degrees. Now, the other aspect of working memory and attention is to eliminate distractions, to not pay attention to the irrelevant stuff in one's environment, or even the irrelevant stuff on your own body. Like, you can't get distracted by, a button that, might be only partially buttoned, or maybe some little something on your sleeve if you're trying to do something else at that moment. Okay, and people with ADHD and people who have subclinical challenges and focus really have a hard time with this, right? The sort of stereotype is, oh, look, a squirrel, that whole thing. But really this typically exists as
Hello, doggo. I'm doing all right. How are you?
Phenomenon for people where they either can't remember what they were doing, or they're simply drawn down different trajectories, different thought trajectories or action trajectories, and then they have a hard time making it back to the original thing that they were trying to focus on. And we know, based on these studies of dopamine and neuroimaging, that eliminating distractors is largely the consequence of dopamine neurons projecting to the prefrontal cortex. Okay, now why am I telling you all this neural circuitry stuff? Well, yes, there are a bunch of studies showing that if you selectively activate the neurons that send dopamine into the basal
Tired as fuck. I feel that. I'm very sick. Just got off a 12-hour shift. Damn.
If you selectively increase the amount of dopamine from neurons projecting to the prefrontal cortex, that you're able to selectively improve the elimination of distractors without improving task switching ability. For practical purposes in this discussion, we want to pay careful attention to whether or not the data tell us that those particular protocols, those particular approaches, are globally increasing dopamine, that is, increasing the activity of dopamine neurons projecting to the basal ganglia and the prefrontal cortex, or selectively to the basal ganglia or selectively to the prefrontal cortex. And what I can tell you now is that fortunately there are several protocols, some of which are behavioral, some of which involve specific over-the-counter supplements, and some of which involve prescription pharmacology, that can tap into each of these systems independently, as well as globally increase dopamine to improve focus and working memory at large. I'd like to take a quick break to acknowledge our sponsor, Element. Element is an electrolyte drink that has everything you need and nothing you don't. That means zero sugar and the appropriate ratios of the electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, and potassium. And that correct ratio of electrolytes is extremely important because every cell in your body, but especially your nerve cells, your neurons, relies on electrolytes in order to function properly. So when you're well hydrated and you have the appropriate amount of electrolytes in your system, your mental functioning and your physical functioning is improved. I drink 1 packet of Element dissolved in about 16 to 32 ounces of water when I wake up in the morning, as well as while I exercise. And if I've sweat a lot during that exercise, I often will drink a 3rd Element packet dissolved
Thank you, Kellogg.
32 ounces of water after I exercise. Element comes in a variety of different flavors.
That sounds nice, Hidalgo.
Really tasty. I like the citrus.
I slept all day, otherwise I'd be in that boat.
I can't pick just one. It also comes in chocolate and chocolate mint, which I find tastes best if they are put into water, dissolved, and then heated up. I tend to do that in the winter months because, of course, you don't just need hydration on hot days and in the summer and spring months, but also in the winter when the temperatures are cold and the environment tends to be dry. If you'd like to try Element, you can go to drinkelement, spelled lmnt.com/Huberman to try a free sample pack. Again, that's drinkelement.com/Huberman. Okay, so let's talk about protocols to improve working memory, specifically by way of changing levels of dopamine in the brain. Now, I've discussed dopamine many times before on this podcast. In fact, we have entire episodes devoted to optimizing and regulating dopamine. And of course, dopamine comes up within the context of the ADHD episodes and other episodes as well. And again, if you have specific questions about dopamine or any other topic for that matter, if you go to hubermanlab.com, that website has been engineered so that you can put one word, such as dopamine, but also multiple keywords, so perhaps dopamine exercise or dopamine cold plunge, etc., into the search function, and it will take you to the specific timestamps of multiple episodes where those topics were discussed, as well as newsletters where some of that information has been...
Otherwise, I'd be in the same boat about doing that and then falling asleep.
Certainly don't need to cover some material about improving dopamine for sake of improving working memory now, but if you're generally interested in the science and pharmacology of dopamine and protocols to modulate dopamine levels, all of that can be found at hubermanlab.com. Okay, so let's say you have a short working memory span or a moderate working memory span, and you want to experiment with increasing levels of dopamine for sake of improving working memory. Now, there are a lot of different ways that one could imagine doing that. Let's start with the behavioral tools known to increase dopamine stores. That is, shown in peer-reviewed studies to increase dopamine stores within certain circuits of the brain that are relevant for working memory performance. And the protocol that immediately leaps to mind is the use of certain non-sleep deep rest protocols. Now, non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR, is actually a term that I coined because there is a practice that's been established for many hundreds of years called yoga nidra, which actually means yoga sleep, whereby individuals, potentially you, if you decide to do them, lie down, listen to a script, that is, listen to an audio script, which generally instructs you to do long exhale breathing, to deliberately relax your musculature of your face and of your body. And yoga nidra typically also involves doing certain intentions. And the instruction always given at the beginning of yoga nidra is that you should try to not fall asleep. Now, some people sometimes fall asleep, some people don't fall asleep, but the idea, and there are data to support, that yoga nidra puts people into...
What's up, Jams? Not much, getting some cleaning done. Drowning on my snot. How are you doing?
Very interesting and unusual brain state for which we're starting to understand more. And actually, I have some plans in the not too distant future to collaborate with Matthew Walker, the author of the book Why We Sleep, and some other colleagues to try and figure out what exact patterns of neural activity are taking place in the brain and restive nervous system during yoga nidra, and this similar protocol, which I call non-sleep deep rest. The difference between yoga nidra and non-sleep deep rest is that non-sleep deep rest doesn't include any of the intentions and removes a lot of the kind of opaque or sometimes called mystical language from the protocol. Now, a great thing is that yoga nidra scripts or protocols, as well as NSDR scripts or protocols, are available totally zero cost. You can find them certainly on apps like Waking Up, but also on YouTube. For instance, if you put NSDR and my last name, there's a 10-minute NSDR script there. There are a lot of yoga nidra scripts. If you prefer a female voice, there are a lot of different excellent female voices out there. One in particular that I like very much is Kelly Boys, first name Kelly, last name B-O-Y-S. She has both yoga nidra and NSDR scripts of various durations of anywhere from 8 minutes all the way out to, I believe, 45 minutes. Why am I telling you all this? Well, there have been several studies, but in particular one, and I do realize we're talking about only one study, but the results are really intriguing as it relates to what we're talking about today. In this study,
Prinkle tube dinner is on the table. Damn, man.
NSDR protocol. They call it yoga nidra.
Yeah, some previews, Doggo.
What they used was essentially a yoga nidra script. They had people lie down and listen to a yoga nidra script and to perform yoga nidra, and they evaluated the amount of dopamine available within the brain both prior to and after performing this Yoga Nidra script. And what they discovered was that after performing a Yoga Nidra protocol, the baseline levels of dopamine, that is the amount of dopamine available in the basal
Thank you,
ganglia and
Shammy.
a few other structures of the human brain, of course these are humans, was increased by as much as 60% as compared to individuals that did a different protocol, not Yoga Nidra, not NSDR. Now, did that study evaluate lots of different durations of Yoga Nidra, aka NSDR? No. They looked at fairly long hour-plus Yoga Nidra sessions. However, there's some other data that have explored Yoga Nidra, aka NSDR, in the context of cognitive performance and a few other circumstances, all of which point to the fact that cognitive performance, and in particular cognitive performance tasks that have a working memory element to them. So they weren't the exact working memory tasks that you did earlier, but they have a working memory element to them. That is, subjects had to keep certain small batches of information in mind and then discard that information in order to be able to perform the task well. All of those show significant improvements in task performance. So while something like NSDR or Yoga Nidra might sound kind of mystical or kind of, wishy-washy, or I guess as the kids say, weak sauce to some of you, it is anything but weak sauce. It is really powerful stuff. And it's powerful stuff as it relates to the very neurochemicals and neural circuits that are involved in working memory. So if I were to take a step back and just say, okay, what are some zero cost, very low, if any risk protocols that one could perform in order to improve dopamine levels without having to ingest anything, take anything, really do much of anything at all, except lie there, do this progressive muscle relaxation. There are a few other things involved in NSDR as well, which you'll learn if you decide to try them, and improve or increase the levels of dopamine availability in the brain significantly. Well, then NSDR and Yoga Nidra really are the first line tools if one wants to do that. I think it's reasonable to say that. And as I mentioned before, there's no reason to think that there's any risk of doing NSDR, Yoga Nidra, provided that you're lying down in a safe place as opposed to like in the middle of the road or something. But assuming you do it in a safe location, I would encourage you to try it for 20 to 30 minutes when you first explore it. Perhaps you do longer, although I personally have a hard time doing long Yoga Nidra scripts regularly. A full hour is a big commitment. I don't generally have that much time. I often will do a 10-minute NSDR. Have there been brain imaging experiments done for each and all of these Yoga Nidra scripts to determine the amount or if there's any dopamine increase within the brain? No. But I think that we can safely extrapolate from that wonderful study out of Scandinavia that showed that when human subjects do this Yoga Nidra protocol, that there's a significant increase in baseline dopamine levels within key neural structures that relate to working memory. Now, many of you have perhaps heard that getting in a cold plunge or taking a cold shower, or provided you can do it safely, getting into a cold ocean or a cold lake can significantly, maybe even double or even triple your circulating dopamine levels. And indeed, that is true. It has been shown that when people get into cold water, typically up to their neck, and that cold water, by the way, can range in temperature anywhere from low 40s to low 60s, depending on how long you stay in, that there is a significant increase in the so-called circulating catecholamines. What are the catecholamines? The catecholamines are dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Now, the evidence for the catecholamine increase in response to cold water mainly stems from two studies, and in particular one. And in that particular study, they had people get into, I wouldn't say super cold water, it was in the low 60 degrees. And by the way, I'm speaking in Fahrenheit here. And they had those human subjects submerged in water up to their neck. I think they actually had them sitting in lawn chairs on the bottom of a pool. But again, their heads were above water so they could breathe. And they stayed in for quite a long while, 45 minutes or longer. And it was observed that there was a big, statistically significant increase in epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine that lasted several hours or more. This is one of the reasons why, if you've ever done deliberate cold exposure, as it's called, it often is uncomfortable when you get in, but then when you get out, you feel different. You feel really good in most cases, provided, if you're me, you take a warm shower afterwards. Yes, I like to do that. I realize if you want to increase your metabolism, perhaps it's better to not warm up afterwards. I like a nice warm shower or to get in the sauna afterwards. That's just me. But nonetheless, deliberate cold exposure clearly induces a state shift of mind and body that most people, provided they do it correctly and they don't go into water that's far too cold for them for too long, they report as pleasant. And I think it's reasonable to assume that some of that is the consequence of these increases in catecholamines, which is why many people opt for a cold shower, which if you're me, cold shower followed by a warm or hot shower, or a cold plunge in the morning, or maybe even just once or twice a week. Many people like them. Typically people like getting out of them and the feeling that they have after they do them, although some of you sickos really like the feeling of getting in and being in it, but not me. The point here is that if we were to take a look at the landscape of zero-cost behavioral tools, in fact, behavioral tools that could potentially save you money, meaning reduce your heating bill, that are known to increase the very neurochemicals, aka dopamine, that are involved in improving working memory, I think it's reasonable to assume that a cold shower about 30 to 60 minutes prior to doing any kind of working memory task or any kind of activity that would require increased focus could be, okay, we don't know, the specific studies have not been done, but could be, in theory, it makes sense mechanistically, it's logically sound, could be done after deliberate cold exposure. And indeed, many people report not just feeling a bit of, mild euphoria or feeling good after deliberate cold exposure, but also an increased capacity to focus. In fact, so much so that a lot of people who do deliberate cold exposure say that they don't require as much caffeine in order to maintain their alertness and energy, which shouldn't be surprising to us at all, right? I mean, it's increasing catecholamines. We know this. So that's another protocol that you could explore as well. Is there an important difference or not between deliberate cold exposure done by cold shower or deliberate cold exposure in a cold plunge or the ocean? Frankly, there haven't been a lot of studies comparing those, but I think it stands to reason that if you have access to a cold plunge or a cold body of water that you can safely get into up to your neck for 30 seconds to a minute, if it's 50 degrees or less, right? If you get in colder water, we know, for instance, if you get into, say, 45-degree water and you only get in for 30 seconds, you're going to get a big increase in the catecholamines, perhaps as big as the catecholamine increase that you would get from being in 60-degree water for 45 minutes. Most people don't have 45 minutes to sit around in water up to their neck, so most people opt for 30 seconds to as much as 3 minutes deliberate cold exposure in a shower or cold plunge or other body of water. Again, only do this if you can do it safely. Never, ever, please, for the love of God, please never, ever do any kind of hyperventilation breathing or breath holding while doing deliberate cold exposure, because you can pass out, you can die. Don't combine breath work and deliberate cold exposure. Just don't. Separate those two things completely, okay? But deliberate cold exposure, we know, is a very reliable way to increase the catecholamines, which includes dopamine. So if you want to explore deliberate cold exposure protocols, get into the nuance of temperature and duration, etc., you can find that completely zero cost. Go to hubermanlab.com, go to the menu tab, scroll down to newsletter, and go to the cold exposure newsletter where it details all of that in short PDF form. Now, some of you are probably asking, hey, what if I was in the high or long working memory span group? I ought to have high baseline levels of dopamine. Should I not do yoga nidra or NSDR? Should I not do deliberate cold exposure?
Yeah, for sure. I usually stock up whenever I get it. I'm gonna start, I think, getting Thrive packages again, because I can order like oat milk and almond milk and stuff from there. I ordered some soup though, because I am dying. Comment does sound good. That's unfortunate. Some vegan stuff is like that. It's not super satisfying. What state, Jams? Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, I feel like the West Coast has the best vegan food.
just close your eyes and I'll close mine. Let me close your heart, it just takes time. We'll be alright. We'll be alright. Only a fool would want me in your gold, honey. I wish you would have been told. 'Cause I'm such a total zombie. You're gone, honey. I wish you would have been told. Only a fool would want me. You're gone, honey. I wish you would have been told.
Fish know what they did. I don't even feel bad. What did the fish do, man?
Said you wanted it, but you let go. Now you're letting yourself slip. Said you wanted it, but you gave up. Now every bone in your body aches. Said you wanted it, but you let go. Now you've turned into a drip. Said you wanted it, but you gave up. Now every bone in your body. So listen, you're not a boy. Not living in a child's world no more. You're not a boy. What good are you for? Everything you laughed at has gone. You left it all behind. You're not a boy. Said you needed it, but it didn't change. Now every time you look, said you needed it, but it stayed the same. Oh, how the bones in your body ache. Said you needed it, but it didn't change. Oh, I can read you like a book. Said you needed it, but it went away.
Okay, goddamn. Past life shit.
You're not a boy. Not living in a child's world no more. You're not a boy. What good are you for? Everything you laughed at has gone. You left it all behind. You're not a boy. Never listen to what anyone said. 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 You're not a boy. Not living in a child's world no more. You're not a boy. What good are you
Hi, Kellogg. Definitely feeling sick. Every time I get up to move, like, my body hurts. Kind of want to take a COVID test. I think I already added the Discord with all my links. Thank you so much, Supernova. You're so sweet. I appreciate that. Aw, thanks, Kellogg. Back to you, buddy. Oh, God. Yeah, I'm not feeling well. I got the heater blowing right on me, but I'm like... cold sweats.
Kick is a very new platform, and a new platform usually means that a lot of new ideas are going to come out.
As soon as I'm feeling able, I'm actually driving up to the new place. That'll be a hike. That'll be lots of fresh air.
You burn me at the stake without a trial. Watching through the flames, I see you smile. It's your world we're living in. I could prove my innocence, but you'd still make me drown in your denial. And you say, don't dress like you're going out. What's next? Can you write it down? I talk less if you shut your mouth. Yeah, I bet you can hear me now. I guess I'm not who you thought. It's okay, it's okay. It's so good you can hate me. Am I not what you want? Use me, I don't mind. I'll be the bad guy. You run all my time.
put you in a tent. For what? What are you doing there? I see. Nice. Hey Sonic, how you doing?
So how have you been?
How fancy.
You'd be better with my name in your mouth. Oh.
You do need a vacation. I'm sorry, Kellogg. Good, relaxing. Good to hear, Sonic. I'm waiting on my soup. And goddamn. Wildin' out, okay. It'd be like that. Damn. Baby's got competition, man. Oh? Can you say who?
As I'm in the midst of applying for residency right now, wish me luck, Grammarly has again been a lifesaver with my application in helping me write my personal statement and CV. Grammarly is your digital writing assistant. It's an all-in-one tool that improves your productivity, triple checks your work, and saves you time when working on multiple assignments. Even the
Trying my best, am I doing enough? Weight on my chest, are you feeling the love? Hands on my neck telling me not to trust. War in my head, I might lose it for fun. Falling, gonna fall in. I can see the lights dimmer, guess I'm all in. The devil's blowing up my phone like he's calling. So much like it's so much serotonin. Die in my room when you see me for less. Drown in my worry when you send a text. Please don't just use me for fake love and sex. I'm sorry, I'm novice, I'm close to a right. Baby, did you fuck me up, or was I just feel sick? Might throw up if I take another sip. I need to fight my thoughts, so I'll take another sip. I can fucking take it anymore.
Okay, I haven't heard of them.
Cause I can't take it anymore and I can't focus. I'm losing my shit. Did you notice? Baby, tell me it's okay.
Yeah, the red pill movement is kind of dying.
How has Shopify enabled your business to scale?
Shopify has enabled my business to scale in so many ways, from getting product to customers in terms of integrating seamlessly with our warehouse.
I saw you from across the room and you were looking at me, close your eyes for a few, and I don't know what to do with that. Burning a hole in my back. Couple months ago I was giving you everything and you left some, thought you were leaving for good. I guess I misunderstood. Oh, and you keep on calling me up, good God. Thought you were good on your own, guess not. And know what a shame you've been gone so long. I'm sorry you waited, cause I moved on. And you keep on calling me up, good God. Thought you were good on your own, guess not. And know what a shame you've been gone so long. I'm sorry you waited, cause I moved on. Tell me all about it. Tell me all about it. Tell me all about it. Said it's been hard for you. Tell me all about it. Tell me all about it. Tell me all about it. And you said it's been hard for you, so tell me all about it. Didn't seem hard for you when you let me down. You said it's been hard for you, so tell me all about it. Didn't seem hard for you when you let me damage. And you keep on calling me up, good God. Thought you were good on your own, guess not. And know what a shame you've been gone so long. I'm sorry you waited, cause I moved on. And you keep on calling me up, good God. Thought you were good on your own, guess not. And know what a shame you've been gone so long. I'm sorry you waited, cause I moved on. Hard for you, so tell me all about it. Tell me all about it. Tell me all about it. Said it's been hard for you, so tell me all about it. Tell me all about it. Tell me all about it.
距離が縮んだ。誰かとこんなに距離が縮んだのは初めてだよ。境界線をなくすこと、本当はすごく怖かった。
I can see you when it's raining. See the tears fall out of your eyes again. Haven't really
felt it lately. All you need to do is ask, I'll do it again. Kissed you one time, didn't think it was a blunder. You wanted to, should I ever get my number? Wish I didn't ever love her. I can't get away, I wanna find another. It's getting worse, but it never works. And the way it hurts feels like a curse. So say goodbye, let's cut our ties. You can try to lie, but I know the signs.
怖かったんだよ堀さん。あのね、俺は自分にこんなにたくさんの表情があるなんて知らなかったよ。
You know full well what you're doing, 'cause it's not the first time you try to fool me. Said a million times to say you miss the cool me. I don't get it 'cause you never even knew me. I know I'm useless, I know I'm worthless. I can't do this, I miss a solace. Know that you want this to happen, 'cause I know that you miss the attention. I can see you when it's raining, see the tears fall out of your eyes again. Haven't really felt it lately. All you need to do is ask, I'll do it again. Kissed you one time, didn't think it was a blunder. You wanted to, should I ever get my number? Wish I didn't ever love her. I can't get away, I wanna find another. It's getting worse, but it never works. And the way it hurts feels like a curse. So say goodbye, let's cut our ties. You can try to lie, but I know the signs.
Take notes, I'm not gonna repeat myself.
You might just find common ground after all.
I can multitask.
I'm getting some soup delivered too. Welcome back, Valley.
Do you find it's a little easier each time you make it disappear? Oh, fools, the magician bends the rules. As the crowd watches his every move. Just a shaking hand without a concrete plan. Do-do-do, 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 do-do-do. Do-do-do, 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 do-do-do. Side steps to death-defying feet. Wait for him to reopen. Look close, you see him sweat the most. Each time his options disappear. Just a shaking hand without a concrete plan. Just a shaking hand without a concrete plan. I'm a shaking hand without a plan. Do-do-do, 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 do-do-do.
Ka.
How many single-family houses, single-family homes would it take to equal one multifamily deal like this? Yeah, I just took the big cushion out, so that like accounted for a lot of it. And I've been pulling everything out of the closet, so it looks quite cluttered for a bit, but I've gotten a lot of it taken care of. Thank you for noticing. Look at these big mushrooms. They're so yummy. I also got hot tea. Anxiety doll, thank you so much for the host. How was your stream? Go give that streamer a follow, guys. I just pinned it in chat. Oh, it wouldn't let me pin. Oh well, I typed it in kick chat. Wait, the one with R. Kelly or whatever? Oh my gosh, it's a classic.
I saved hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Liberty, liberty, liberty. Liberty.
We got the house! You did!
Pods handles the driving. Pack it.
Wait. Send me a link to what you're referencing.
It was me the whole time!
Well done, ma'am. With Snapshot from Progressive, you get a personalized discount for being a safe driver.
Say, Snapshot savings!
No regrets.
Oh, hey, John.
John, you gotta come out of the closet. Oh my God.
L. Ron Hubbard doesn't think I'm a great actor.
Maybe you took what he said out of context. Okay, it's like, if you don't come out, can I at least come in and talk to you?
Well, okay, but no tricks.
No tricks. Hey, it's really nice in here.
Yeah, see?
I feel really safe. Oh my God.
Oh my God. I think we're good. I think if it's like under 30 seconds, we're good.
Tiny fragments of celestial light, softly catching every wish tonight, wondering while entranced by their spell, if behind every star lies a story to tell. If only I could go back in time and hold these shadows at bay, return the world as we knew, we'll be okay. The lights shining in view, they're calling to you. Silently lost, wandering spirits, our hearts, the sun and moon. If I traveled the stars up above, will the answers I find help the strangers I love and carry me forth in time where I belong? If only I could go back in time so I could meet you someday. I'll send a message to you, only to say the lights forming a sea, they called us to me, guiding our lost, wandering spirits. Our hearts will soon be free. If you traveled the stars up above, may their answers give hope as to me I once was, and carry you forth to find where you belong.
Just because a hotel says it's dog friendly doesn't mean a dog will find it very friendly.
Sure. That sounds good. I'm probably gonna go to bed here in a minute, actually, because I feel like shit. So I think I'm gonna lay down again. And I'm gonna get some other stuff done real quick. Hey Pinky, how are you?
Do you really? First up, we've got
Very nice. Congrats. Nice, Kellogg. I'll have to come stop by sometime. What's up, Pinky? Aw, back at you. I can't try and pronounce it right now. I'm too sick. Oh, man. My throat.
You always know when you live in Gaza that it's only a matter of time.
Just listen. You can hear the critical role birds play in the harmony of nature. But due to climate change, 2/3 of North American species are at increasing risk of extinction. Your donation
Underneath the skin is hurt. Defeated but undead leaves me wary as you were. She's calling my name again, saying it's alright. Let it be, take the flame, breathe inside my head.
I remember, Pinky. I just can't say it because my throat right now. It's heavy on the throat with that pronunciation, kind of. I have a headache too. I think I'm gonna get off here in a minute, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, even though I'm a little sick baby.
Just creep inside my head, inside my head, 'cause that's where you wanna be. Inside my head, inside my head, inside my head, inside my head.
Aw, I love you guys. Sweet dreams, guys. I'm gonna head out now. I feel like I'm gonna pass out. I'm gonna drink some more tea and some NyQuil probably. Bye, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night.